Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessa, and I'm so happy you're here for this episode of Better Sex. I've dedicated my professional life to helping couples enjoy a fulfilling, intimate life. I believe that sex is important. Our connections to other people matter, and we're not living our life to the fullest if we aren't connecting emotionally and sexually with our partner. That's why I'm here, bringing ideas and information to help you live and love better. This is a topic that's dear to my heart. Today's episode is about talking about sex to children, to kids, and to teenagers. And it matters to me because I see too many people in my practice who didn't have this when they were young. They grew up in a household where sex was taboo, where it was invisible or just not talked about at all, where it was sinful or dirty, or there's just a complete lack of information. And this sets people up to struggle in their sex lives later. You know, they either have misinformation or unrealistic expectations, or they don't know how to talk about it, so they go into a relationship with no skills to address issues with their partner. You know, it's a big deal when you don't have this background. And part of the work I do with clients in session, I'm helping them with their sex life, but I will ask about what they're doing with their children. How are they communicating this? Are they hiding and making sex secretive and taboo in their household, or are they being more mindful about what messages they actually want to choose to give their kids instead of the default of let's not give them any messages at all, which actually becomes let's give them a negative message. So it matters to me a lot that people are talking to their children, that we are as a culture creating a space where sex can be a normal part of life and talked about in ways that are informative, positive, encouraging, open to curiosity. I want to be a part of making this easier for parents. So, with that in mind, I have invited Robin LaCross to be a guest today. She's a holistic health practitioner and a sex educator. And she's been teaching natural birth control methods for 25 years or more because she's passionate about making sure that young women grow up knowing and understanding their body and their cycle. And she works a lot with mothers. They hire her to help them raise empowered daughters because she realizes, there are a lot of moms who are projecting their own fears on their daughters, and they lack the knowledge and the skill to successfully communicate with their daughters the information they need so that they can make, safe and smart choices around sexuality and resist peer pressure. So she's really devoted to this, and she's fascinating to talk to, and I really hope you enjoy the episode. Great. Well, thank you, Robin, for being with me today. I'm really glad you're here.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here too.
So I would love you to start with, talking about what got you into this field, right? And what drew you in and propelled you.
Yeah, it's really been a journey of personal story. I kind of feel like it's my personal PhD in life. Just to kind of give you in the nutshell version is, when I was a teenager, my mom put me on the pill. And by the time I was 19 or so, I was moving towards a more natural lifestyle. And I really didn't want to be putting hormones in my body anymore. And what I realized was, in spite of having sex education in school twice and the talk with my mom,
right? The talk.
The talk. I actually had no idea how to protect myself from getting pregnant if I wasn't taking the pill. And even though I learned about condoms in school and even actually had used them with a previous partner, condoms really didn't come to mind. And so I just kind of didn't know what to do. And so I ended up staying on the pill an extra year longer than I wanted to while I tried to figure that out. And I started like going to bookstores and that kind of thing. And one day I stumbled upon this book of natural family planning. And basically it's a religiously flavored book on how to get pregnant. And what I took away from that book was the discovery that I could actually tell when I was fertile and my body was doing things that, could be tracked and monitored, and I could learn to tell when I was fertile, which it blew my mind. I had no idea that any of this stuff even existed or was possible and that kind of thing. And after my mind kind of put itself back together, my next thought was, why didn't my mom know this stuff to teach me?
Mm.
And I mean, of course I knew why. She didn't know. And she gave me everything that she had, everything that her mother told her, which was even less than what she told me. And, so she did the best that she could. So when I started figuring this stuff out, I'm a naturally curious person. I'm scientifically minded. And so I just really wanted to know more and understand, how this stuff worked. And so what I ended up doing was going to like the university, the medical libraries, and looking to see what the scientists knew about the female body. And so I did, a bunch of research on like, what did they know? Herbs were, came up. And so I was, interested in how herbs were affecting their fertility and all that great stuff. And as I learned more, I wanted to share that information. And so I started teaching other women, and they were coming to me. One of my goals is to, prevent unintended pregnancy and the spread of STDs. And they were coming to me, having been exposed to viruses or having had unintended pregnancies and that sort of thing. And what I realized was that women needed this information sooner. And I tried briefly talking to the teenagers about it, but again, was just finding that, the information wasn't getting into their hands soon enough. And so that's when I realized that I needed to be talking to moms. And, because mom is always there. I think the whole conversation around sex and relationships and all of the many different facets of that conversation, because it's definitely a vast, wide, and deep conversation that we can have.
Yeah, it's not the talk, it's a bunch of talks.
Yeah, it's
right?
many talks. And, it's like, and you can start really young and like build as you go and like add layers of complexity and all this kind of stuff. And, and the more you talk about it, the less awkward it feels.
Right.
Uncomfortable for everybody.
Right.
Like, oh, mom's always talked about her period or, whatever, ever since I can remember, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And so growing up with that kind of exposure, I mean, that's great. And, but if you haven't had a chance to talk to your kids that way since they were little, it's never too late to start.
Right. It's interesting. Part of the reason I was so excited to have you on the show and do this topic is because as a sex therapist, I'm working with couples that are having sexual issues.
Right.
And it's always striking when people grew up with no information or no communication with their family. They've got misinformation or they've got shame and guilt or whatever they have, but they didn't grow up in households often that were open and informative. Right. And it really makes a difference. And so part of what I talk to clients about too is what are you doing with your kids around this?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to communicate? And hopefully the next generation has it better off. So,
right. Yeah. I'm so glad that you're raising that topic.
I definitely do.
Yeah.
So when you're talking to moms about talking to their kids, about sex, what are the basic messages that you're encouraging them to communicate? Like what's the foundation of what you want them to teach?
There's definitely certain topics and areas that, I think are beneficial to cover. And, as far as like whatever the message is that, a parent wants to deliver, I think, that's going to be flavored by their values. And I would hope that they would, take the time to educate themselves so that they have all the facts so that they can deliver, factual information. And, like I created a checklist for my clients and stuff of just like different like age groups and topics that you can cover, for those age groups, just to kind of give parents, just kind of a little bit of a roadmap, even if you will, of like these different conversations that you could have with your child, things that you might want to think about and, think about the messages that you want to deliver and that kind of thing. And I would just encourage people to, be open-minded and think about like what kind of messages you want to deliver. Because, we grew up in this society, our culture, and there's a lot of beliefs and things that we do that are woven into our society that we don't really think about, but aren't necessarily healthy. And, a lot of that stuff is starting to come out with like, the whole Me Too, things that are happening, and these things that have been happening in our culture that we're not talking about or that we could handle better or differently, all that type of thing. So,
Right.
so yeah, and I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it. I think the main thing is to just do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely want to cover your roadmap, because one of the questions is, when do you introduce what those guidelines would be really useful to sort of go over in some detail. But but it's interesting to me that it sounds like maybe the beginning of the process is what are the values that the person wants to communicate? What are the messages that they think are important? And just trying to help them explore that and formulate that and have, I guess, a plan or a strategy.
Yeah. A lot of people don't really ever think about like, what are their values? Like what values does your family have? And so, when I sit down with my clients, that's actually one of the exercises we go through. We talk about values and what are your personal values? What values, do you want for your household or your family, your family values? And your child will develop values of their own, and they may not be the same as yours or your family values. And how do you feel about that? So, when I work with a client, we have a safe space where moms can come, or dad, parents can come to have these conversations and explore how they're feeling and identify like, what are the messages actually that I want to deliver? Because a lot of times we haven't even thought about that.
Right. Can you give us a couple examples of the kinds of values or messages people decide on? Like what's the range of possibilities that come to mind?
Well, honesty is like a great value. For example, like there's honesty in relationships, honesty in communication. Honesty can also be hard, and sometimes it can be a little bit sharp and cutting and that kind of thing. And so, really, it's just a question of figuring out what your own values are and thinking about, like, in a relationship, like, what role does honesty play in relationship? When a child is young, their relationships are gonna start out with family members. As they get older and into school, they're gonna have friendships. And so as they get older, it's like you can build in layers of things. So like when you're in the household, you're probably going to have conversations about honesty, sometimes stealing comes up, so there's like that whole piece of, like integrity, honesty, things that we consider right and wrong in our society and that kind of stuff. And then as they get older and they get friends, then how does the honesty play into having a relationship, with your friend? And then when you're moving into romantic relationship, how does honesty apply in that relationship? And, just thinking about like that type of stuff. It's like,
right.
And also like checking in with yourself is like, am I living out that value in my own relationship?
Yeah. It seems if you're going to focus on honesty as one of your family values, then that needs to get reflected in your communication with your child, right?
Absolutely.
Being honest in that relationship.
Absolutely.
Right? And make sure it's all congruent.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so, it's like kind of just picking things apart and thinking about it and, checking in with yourself to see, are you living that way? Are you being that example? Because, kids learn by watching us way more than they do by what we hear, what they hear, what we
do
say.
what I do. No, rather than what I say, for sure.
Yeah.
So. Okay. So how can parents introduce the topic of sex, and when? I'm sure there's not like one correct answer, but what's your your sort of guideline or ideas about that?
Yeah, there's lots of doorways in. Animals are a great way to introduce the whole concept of sex. You can walk down the street and see two doves, two pigeons, on the side of the road getting it on. It's like, oh, what do you think they're doing? And see what your kid says.
Yeah.
And just like, oh, well, actually, they're going to make a baby, or whatever type thing. They're having sex. Animals can be a really easy way of kind of introducing, that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
When people are pregnant, again, that can be another, doorway in. Questions sometimes come up, just answer them honestly and take a deep breath if it's not expected and you weren't prepared. It's like, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. Just take a deep breath and say something like that. And then that gives you a second to say, okay, what am I going to say? And, just try to keep your face neutral, and there's no right or wrong way. And there's lots of opportunities that come up. And sometimes, depending what's on the TV, there may be opportunities to, talk about things that they see in movies or on the television or in commercials, that type of thing. So you just look for opportunities. There's a lot of great books out there that you can use that can open the conversation. One in particular that I give to my clients is, it's so amazing. It's a book about eggs, sperm, birth, babies, and families.
Huh. Okay.
So that one's like for age 7 and up. And then there's another version that's for kids that are a little bit older. So that can be a good, easy place to start.
Okay. I'll make sure to put those links on the show notes too, because that sounds like a good resource.
Yeah. So, there's lots of tools available, and I can send people to my website and they can download a copy of that checklist too.
Yeah.
So if people are interested in that too. And a lot of the conversations, start out with, for example, how you talk to young children about not slapping or hitting people or, like boundaries, essentially what we're talking about, like being kind to each other, boundaries, that type of stuff. And so like these conversations actually start when they're pretty young, and, they evolve when they go to school. It's like, you don't pull the girl's hair or whatever, classmate's hair, or when you're going out on your first dates, like these days we're asking permission to kiss and go to the next step and go to the next step. And so teaching kids to ask permission, like, oh, your hair's so beautiful. Can I touch it? Kind of thing. And getting permission. Oh yeah, you can touch it. That would feel really good. And, or whatever it is. So these conversations evolve. And so I love the idea of like an onion. It's like, you start when they're young, you have like this basic foundation conversation about, like how we behave in society, type thing. And then as they get a little older, it's like, okay, here's how we behave in the classroom. As we're getting older and dating, these are things that are culturally appropriate and not anymore. And here's how we can keep each other safe and make sure that everybody's a full body yes instead of well, whatever, I don't care, or
right. Like you're saying, like consent becomes part of this conversation too, not just the what sex is about or why people might do it, but that consent would be part of that from the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there ever an age? Would you say there's ever an age that's too young?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, when you have a little baby and you're teaching them body parts, it's like, instead of using baby words like, oh, this is your pee-pee, it's like, no, this is your penis. This is your, this is your vulva. This is your vagina. It's like, and for the girls, a lot of people will generalize the vulva and say vagina. Right. But I would invite people, like, let's use proper anatomy. Let's teach our children, like this is your vulva. This is the external area.
Right.
This is your clitoris. This is where the pee comes out, the urethra. This is the opening of the vagina. It's like, these are actual parts of your body and they have names,
and I'm even thinking, it is one of my pet peeves when people use vagina for vulva. But I'm thinking, some of the listeners may not know that anatomy still.
No, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I know this comes up. And so I certainly would encourage parents to pull out a book, look at diagrams and figure this stuff out before they're old enough to ask the question so that they are educated.
And I will also say that a lot of our books are woefully, have a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, I bought a textbook on gynecology. I went and spent, I don't remember how much it was, like $150 on a 2013 gynecology textbook. It's like 4 inches thick. This is like a piece of a book. It's like, I wanted to know, what are the doctors learning? Because I wanted to know, like, are they teaching the fertility awareness things? It's like, do they actually understand like how the cycle works? And let me tell you, there was a lot of missing information in there.
Wow. Yeah. Certainly I hear that kind of story from, people go to a gynecologist and the gynecologist isn't comfortable talking about sex.
Yeah.
Right? They'll talk about a vagina maybe, but they're not.
Right.
I mean, it just the education is
It's
often
not there.
inadequate, you know,
It's just
and
not
the
there.
comfort level is not there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so find a good book. One of my favorites, I don't know if you use this at all, but is The Guide to Getting It On.
I haven't looked at that one.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, very entertaining and funny book, but there's great illustrations and descriptions. It's very explicit, but it's fun.
Nice. Yeah.
So it's a great place for adults, you know, or even teenagers, but adults to learn if they need information.
I'm glad you brought that up, because here's the thing. It's like teenagers are curious and they want to know about sex. And if we don't provide a safe avenue for them to go down to educate themselves, then they're going to go to porn. Porn is at their fingertips. It's super easy to find, and it makes for terrible sex. So it's like, okay, so why don't we have like safe places for teens to go and look at things that are explicit and learn how to become a conscious lover? And it's time for all of these conversations. And I know it's awkward and it feels uncomfortable, and we didn't grow up, you know, having these conversations. And so how are we supposed to know how to have this conversation? But that's why you're here. That's why I'm here. It's like we are providing a safe space for people to start having these conversations.
Yeah. And if you think about, I mean, again, every family is going to have their own values and their own message, but if you want your child to eventually be a safe and respectful and conscious lover to their partner, whether that's going to be only after marriage or not, you know, to equip them for that, you know, to give them that information so that they can have that in their mind for when they're ready.
Exactly.
They're not looking on the side in the porn or learning it from.
I mean, like, God only knows what they'll see. There's like horrible, awful things there. And it's like, it's kind of scary.
It's not realistic. It's not where you learn about sex, for sure.
This is not what feels good. And, you know, and speaking of feeling good, our culture tells women, young girls, that the first time you have sex, it's going to hurt. Well, you know, that isn't necessarily true. But if you're like engaging in porn style sex, then it probably will. But if you were to have a conscious lover who understood the female body, then there's no reason why it should hurt.
Right.
So, and there could be medical reasons, but in general,
Well, in sex ed, I mean, it's focused largely on preventing STIs and preventing pregnancy.
It's fear-based.
Right? Fear-based. As opposed to how can you go in this in a joyous way, in a connected way, in a safe way, respectful, all those things we might want our children to understand.
Right.
You know, when they're ready.
Ultimately have that as part of their life, because I mean, all kids grow up, and, you know, it's like most parents want grandchildren, you know, not all of them, but, you know, I mean, a lot of them do. And what is more beautiful than conceiving a baby consciously in love? You know, it's like, so if girls grow up knowing and understanding their body, knowing, you know, how to tell when they're fertile, it's like they can reduce unintended pregnancies. They can consciously conceive a child when they're ready to bring one in. And, I mean, how beautiful is that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So.
It's Jessa here, just taking a quick break. Thanks for listening. Are you interested in being a guest on the show? I'm always looking for people with expertise to share that could enrich other people's sex lives. And I'm also interested in hearing from people who have transformed their own intimate relationship and would want to share their story with my listeners. So if you've got something to contribute to the discussion and want to see about being featured on an upcoming episode, please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, and check out the Be a Guest details. You'll find everything you need there. So can you go over your checklist just a little bit? Give us a little idea of the layers of the onion?
Yeah. Starting off when you've got like baby to 3 years old, you know, you can focus on the anatomy, proper terminology, that kind of stuff. As they're getting a little bit older, you can start talking about that your body is your own, and, you know, start educating them, you know, to protect them from sexual abuse, you know, good touching, bad touching, you know, all that stuff.
Right.
around that time frame is great opportunities for, conversation, around boundaries and respecting other people's personal space, their belongings, respecting other people, so like your basic human life lessons that will evolve and you'll add to those as you go. And, and as the kids start getting older, depending on, when you give them a smartphone or whatever, hopefully it's not too young, but whatever you decide is
right.
Kid, it's totally fine with me. I have no judgment or opinion about it. It's like, but we do know that there are issues with cell phones, especially smartphones, it's the window to the internet, the world, and there's all kinds of stuff that kids can get into there. But anyway, that aside, whenever your child does get a smartphone, the conversation around porn should be had, and that it's not real, that you probably shouldn't be looking at it, kind of thing. It's for adults and it's not for children and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose there's social media safety too. I mean, just not to text pictures or not to, engage with strangers. I mean, all that kind of thing. That's probably a whole other show.
That's another, but I mean, it's true. I mean, the whole sexting thing, as you're getting up into like the teenagers, you're going to want to have those conversations, the sexting, even the preteen, a lot of the kids, around age 10, 11, 12 are starting to have exposure to that stuff too. So those are definitely important conversations to have at any time, like that book that I just pulled out, that's 7 and up, to start having that, the whole sex conversation about, bodies and changing bodies and that kind of stuff. Girls around the age of 8 or so, you probably do want to start having the conversations around menstruation and puberty and that kind of stuff, because there have been girls who actually get their period around 8 years old.
Yeah.
And it can be very scary for a young girl who knows nothing about menstruation to be bleeding.
Right.
And it can be terrifying, in fact.
Yeah.
And so, having at least some sort of conversation, whether it's an open discussion and it's like your kids have known you've menstruated since they were born or whatever, or you haven't had that conversation and you just need to have it. And, teach them, about how to use, tampons, menstrual cups, what the, options are, pads, et cetera, where to find them if they need them. And then it's nice to be able to include what's happening in your body.
Yeah.
Because menstruation is part of like this beautiful, magical thing. And the female cycle is just like, it's amazing. It's like we have the ability to create life, and whether we use that to actually birth babies or create projects and, birth projects into the world, it's like we have this reservoir of creative life force within us, and it's pretty amazing. And so every month, it's like our hormones do their little dance, we ovulate, and then, if the egg is not fertilized, we menstruate. And so if the goal is not to get pregnant, it's like we can celebrate. It's like, yes, another cycle where there was no baby in the world, especially if you're sexually active. But yeah, that might be a little premature for an 8-year-old, but
But part of what I hear you saying is, we might want to have these conversations about puberty earlier than we might have thought, first of all. And then those are a nice jumping off point for why do we even go through puberty? What are these changes, for and allow us to do, which sort of opens up the conversation about sex. Reproduction, but pleasure and relationship, and all of it.
Absolutely. Like I said, it's a deep, multifaceted conversation with so many fun things to talk about.
And I don't know if you have any, I don't know if you have a suggestion for this or not. It seems different to me. If kids approach us with questions, boom, we have this opportunity, and it might startle us, but at least, it's been raised. What about for people whose children, they're not asking these questions, like how do you introduce the talk?
Right. So even if your kid is not asking, have the conversations anyway, because they hear stuff in their environment and their friends talk. Their friends may be educating your kids on the side with all sorts of myths and misinformation and things that are not exactly true. And so by not having these conversations, you also send the message that it's maybe not okay to talk about this.
Right.
And so therefore, they're not sure they should bring it up, especially if you have a history of having like big reactions to certain things. Then again, it may not feel safe to go down that avenue where, culturally it's like sex is a taboo topic culturally. And so kids pick up on that, even if we try to protect them and that kind of stuff. I mean, when we're protecting them, we're enforcing the message that it's taboo. So
right. And they will take our silence on a topic to be a directive, like, don't ask me about this. I'm uncomfortable with this. Don't bring it up.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So what do you advise if parents aren't comfortable talking about sex? I mean, an awful lot of people aren't. How can they prepare for some of these conversations and be more, I guess I want to say more skillful, but it's even just more open or more relaxed or more effective?
Practice with friends, practice with your partner, hire a coach.
Like you, like that. I mean, that's part of what you do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hire somebody like me. Educate yourself. A lot of times our discomfort comes because we're not really sure exactly what the facts are or what we want to say, or we may have trauma in our past that makes it hard to talk about, or that we might be afraid that questions will come up that we don't want to discuss. So that can make us reluctant to raise the topic. And it's okay to tell your child, it's like, I'm not really comfortable talking about this. This isn't something that I grew up talking about. And so feels really new, like new territory. And it's okay to be vulnerable. And, you can just say, this is part of my parental responsibility. I'm preparing you for life. This is information that you need to know going forward. And I know that you're probably uncomfortable too. And it's okay. And let's just be gentle and patient with each other. And maybe let's go do something fun while we talk about it. Like I have one of my clients, she takes her daughter camping. So every year in the summer, they go and spend a night and out at the campground, and they go for hikes. And she talks about, she started talking about puberty. She started out talking about menstruation. And, as her girls get older, she's been expanding on the conversation. And so what that has done is it's provided an annual expectation, which I hope that you have the conversations more often than annually, but it's like a big, like it's a thing,
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Yeah. So it became something that she's looking forward to and that kind of thing. And it creates like a safe space where you can go and have these conversations. And my friend, she's my friend too. But she, could deliver her message. Her daughter has opportunity to think about it, digest that information. They're still in their little bubble, at the campground, and she can come back and ask questions and that kind of thing. And so it just really provides like a lovely space for, this type of thing to happen. And so, you can have a conversation like that. If your kid doesn't want to talk to you, you can have a conversation with them while they're trapped in the backseat of your car and you're driving them to school, and you can be like, okay, we're at the last 10 minutes. I'm going to deliver my message right now. When we get there, that's an escape for them and it'll be perfect,
Right.
So
I got to say, I've got 3 kids and they've been very different in their receptivity to those conversations.
Yes.
But even the one that just doesn't want to hear it, I know he's listening. And I know he knows he can come to me if he ever needs it, right? Like, so even that resistance is not a reason to stop. It's
right.
It's really a reason to continue to bring it up and make sure this is a topic that's open in our household.
Yes. And, and bring it up more than once. I mean, it takes people like 7 times to actually hear something. And a lot of times there's been research done. It's like, they'll ask the parent, like, have you had this conversation with your kid? And they'll be like, oh yeah, we had that. And then they'll ask the kid, did they have this conversation with you? I'd be like, hell no, they didn't talk to me about that.
Right.
And so like, there's like these 2 different, perspectives. Like, oh yeah, we talked about that already. And the kid is like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Like, I checked out during that conversation and I have whatever they said. I have no idea, but no, we didn't have that conversation.
Right. So be persistent. So
yeah. So, and think about like different ways that you can deliver the same message type thing. And so if they don't hear it one way, maybe they'll hear it another way, type thing. And especially if like there's resistance, to like listening and that kind of stuff. Sometimes stories can be a good way of like sneaking in that information or the message that you want to deliver.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of different ways to accomplish your
I'm
goal.
struck sort of in closing here, how important it is, I think, for parents to be intentional about what message they want to give their kids about sex. Because I think people that aren't comfortable talking about it or didn't grow up talking about it or whatever, they often pass that along to their kids unless they realize, wait, we want to do it differently with our kids. We want to give them the message that sex is good and positive and healthy and a normal part of life. And if we're going to do that, we've got to step out of our comfort zone. Because if they do it by default, if they just go with, what they're used to, they're going to give a different message than that.
It's really true. And, you can have like the best kid in the world. They can be like a star student, a stellar athlete, this kind of thing. And our cultural upbringing can set them up in like a bad way. Like I'm going to use the example of Brock Turner, like he's the star athlete, wealthy parents, good school, blah, blah, blah. But for whatever reason, he thought what he was doing was okay. And sure, you can add alcohol and that brings out the worst in people, but there's already the tendency for that thing to happen. And, I've had parents be like, oh, I'm so glad I have boys. It's like, it's so much easier. And it's like, no. Actually, that doesn't absolve you from having these conversations. And by not having these conversations, it's like you're putting your son at risk to end up in jail, you know, for, being branded as a sex offender. And the whole Me Too thing. It's like these girls that's like society has made it okay for men to take advantage of these girls, women, men, also boys have been affected. I mean, it's rampant. And so, so having these conversations with both girls and boys, and being really intentional about the messages that we want them to take away and take with them, especially when they go to college.
Right.
It's super important, College is a risky place to be a young woman, It's like date rape thing, all the alcohol that's being consumed. I mean, it can be a real jungle out there, and it really helps to prepare your kids before you send them off into all that. So
I agree. Well, thanks so much. Do you want to just say a word about how people can find out about you, what your website is?
Yeah, my website is called Raising Empowered Daughters. So raisingempowereddaughters.com. And if you go there, you can sign up and get the checklist that I put together for everybody. It's pretty extensive. I know we just scratched the surface of it here. And I have lots of other great resources that are available for moms. I work mostly with moms, but, I would never say no to a dad either. So I was like, I'm totally here to help parents raise empowered daughters and conscious sons. I want to shift the way our society talks about sex. So I feel like we need to do that from the ground up, and that starts in the families. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, me too.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.